This video is copyright protected, which is detailed on the last slide. This training video was created to show you how to properly diagnose and troubleshoot some of the most common error codes on your FleetFlex hopper spreader. If your hopper experiences a connection issue, the control may display a NC or CE code. In order for the spreader to work properly, the spreader module needs to receive battery power and ground into port B of the spreader module. The spreader module also needs to see the communication signal coming into port B on the tan and white wires. This communication signal comes from the control and travels through the twisted pair of communication wires in the control harness, vehicle cable assembly, and the spreader side harness. If the spreader module does not see battery power on pin K and ground on pin F, or does not see the low voltage communication signal on the tan and white wires, the spreader will be inoperable and more than likely your control will display the NC or CE code. Corrosion, chafed or broken wires, and broken pins will also cause a connection issue. It is important that you check for any obvious breaks, shorts, loose connections, and corrosion. The NC code indicates that there is no connection detected between the hopper and the vehicle. The CE code indicates that there is a communication error between the spreader module and the cab control. Although these two codes have small differences, they should be treated in the same manner. If the NC or CE code flashes on the cab control, the first thing you should check is your connections. First, check the connection from the vehicle harness to the spreader harness. Ensure that the connectors are tight, free of corrosion, and there are no broken pins. Check the connection of the 10-pin connector going into port B of the spreader module. Make sure there are no pins pushed out of the back of the connector causing a connection issue. Also, check the control harness connections at the back of the cab control as well as the 6-pin connector going to the vehicle cable assembly. If there are any visible signs of damage to any harness, replace that harness. Unplug the harness connector at port B of the module, and on the connector end with the key turned on, use a multimeter to check for 12 volts on the red wire on pin F and check for ground on the black wire on pin K. There should be 12 volts and ground present on those pins with the key turned on. If there is no power or there is no ground, back up a connector and check for the proper power and ground until you find where the break is. In the same connector with the control turned on, check for voltage on the white and tan wire. The tan wire should approximately read between 0.8 to 1.5 volts, and the white wire will read between 2.8 to 3.5 volts. If there is no voltage on the white or tan wire, trace the communication wires through the harnesses and see where the break is. There should not be any continuity between any of the wires in the connectors. Check the harnesses for any traces of continuity between the wires in the harnesses. Check for resistance on the white and tan communication wires. This can be done by using a jumper wire and connecting it between pins 2 and 3 of the white 4-pin connector on the control harness in the cab. Unplug the connector of port B of the module and connect the meter between pins C and D on the white and tan wire. The meter should read 0 resistance. If all the harnesses test good through all the necessary checks, it is possible that there is a bad spreader module or cab control. The HO and SO code will cause your spreader to turn on briefly for a few seconds and then shut off, immediately flashing a HO or SO code. The HO code indicates a hopper feed motor overload, and the SO code indicates a spinner motor overload. If your control is flashing a HO code, the module is sensing that the conveyor motor is drawing high amperage. If the spreader is indicating that the motor is drawing too much amperage, the motors will stop running. First, check all the connections for any loose, corroded, or chafed wiring at both the motor and the spreader module, as well as the truck and spreader side harness. Inspect the conveyor and ensure that there is no jammed material. If the hopper is full of material, you may have to empty the hopper manually in order to check for jammed material and ensure that there is no damage to the conveyor chain. Check the bearings for proper greasing and ensure no bearings are seized. Using an amp clamp, check the amp draw on the conveyor motor power wire. With the conveyor empty, the motor should draw between 10 to 18 amps. With the hopper loaded with sand, the motor should draw between 30 to 45 amps. Remove the motor and try turning the input shaft on the gearbox to check for any internal damages in the gearbox. With the conveyor motor disconnected, jump power and ground to the motor to see if you may have a defective conveyor motor. If everything tests good, try replacing either the spreader module or cab control. If the control is flashing a SO code, the module is sensing that the spinner motor is drawing too much amperage. Check the connections at both the motor and the spreader module. Make sure all connections are tight and free of corrosion. Visually inspect the wiring to ensure there is no damage. With your hand, grab a hold of the poly spinner disc and see if you can spin it with ease. For your safety, disconnect the vehicle harness from the spreader harness before performing that check. Check for any jammed material in the chute that could be causing the spinner to bind. Check the bearings to make sure they are properly greased and not seized. With the unit plugged back in, use an amp clamp to check the amp draw on the motor power wire. With the hopper empty, the spinner motor should draw between 5 to 10 amps, and with the hopper loaded, the spinner motor should draw between 10 to 15 amps. Check the belt alignment and set screw on the electric motor gear. Disconnect the spinner motor from the module and jump power and ground to the motor to see if the motor works properly. It is possible that the motor is defective and needs to be replaced. Lastly, if everything tests out good, try replacing the spreader module or cab control. Thank you for watching this video. For more troubleshooting procedures, please reference the Spreader Mechanics Guide, which is located under the support section on the website. For any additional information or questions, please contact the technical support team for further guidance.